On average, 7.5 to 8% of companies, depending on the geography, have graduated from doing a seed round to a Series A round. Only
7%.
7%. Content marketing is some of the most powerful marketing that is underutilized in the region. You have more data than the market does on your subject. People are attracted by numbers, facts, insights.
Yes.
In the facts and figures, those are the things that people remember afterwards. And I feel like in any industry, completely underutilized, and people don't realize the information that they have, which can be shared at an aggregate level, is extremely powerful for the consumer or the end user. That storytelling is more important.
Really?
Yeah, at the very early
Do you think
stage.
storytelling can inflate the valuation more than it is actually when it's grounded in numbers? Innovation and entrepreneurship are two faces of the same coin, and the propellers for those innovations and entrepreneurship, government and policy, capital, culture, talent. Which one do you think is the weakest link here in our region? Congratulations.
Thank you. For
10 years?
Yes.
Literally, while I was obviously researching your profile on MAGNiTT, November
Yes.
2015.
Correct.
Wow.
By license date. Yes, exactly.
Goodness me. Okay, tell me about it. How did it start?
It's been quite a journey. I've always been interested in entrepreneurship, and the essence of the original MAGNiTT was, while I was doing my MBA, I did all of the entrepreneurial classes. And one of the things that I identified during the weekend of a startup bootcamp was that it was very difficult to connect with people to get interest in your idea. One of the things that they asked us to do on this weekend is reach out to people that could potentially facilitate something as a mentor, as guidance, and etc.
Fill a gap.
Right. And it was very difficult to do. And so version 1 of MAGNiTT, because we've pivoted probably, I like to say 7 times in 10 years, is that it was a connection platform for MBAs, specifically a niche market to start with. One of the learning lessons they tried to tell you when you were studying, find a niche and then expand it out, not try and do everything at the same time.
Focus, right?
Focus. So MBA entrepreneurs connect with MBA alumni, investors, mentors, co-founders, whatever it was that would facilitate a conversation.
Right.
And at the time, and I say this, was that Tinder was being used when we were studying in class Match.com. And the reason I give that example was because when you look at Match.com, the essence of what was considered as blue ocean at the time was that you could go through psychological testing, 15-page questionnaires to try and find the ideal perfect match, which they would curate for you at a cost, for the sake of argument, of thousands of dollars.
Right.
And then Tinder was literally coming out where it guaranteed nothing. It provided you nothing more than a picture, a name, an age. It created a connection mechanism where you would communicate with that person, and that was it. And it was almost like revolutionizing the concept of deep intelligence, due diligence from an investment perspective, to creating a connection and then seeing where the idea went from there. And so I effectively tried to apply that model to what was a startup community. And of course, now 10 years later, as you say, there's so many learning lessons along the way. There's a reason Tinder works and why it doesn't work for startups, because you don't invest in companies based on a picture. You don't invest based on an elevator pitch. You don't need
a slightly more complicated due diligence.
Slightly more complicated due diligence. So it kind of moved from that towards the Middle East. I was based here in Dubai. We didn't really get too much traction. And it was really only when I started creating research that people knew what we were. So people thought we were a connection platform. And I always tell the story, but it's, I used to sit next to Mai Medhat, who was the founder of Aventus. And we were in a co-working space here in Dubai. And she could see that I was struggling. I was like, what is this? What are we doing? We built the app. People aren't really using it. We've got all these people, startups on it. We're not really getting the other side of the marketplace. And then she said something which I always credit her for, which was, you have more data than anybody else does on the startup ecosystem here, because all the startups on your platform. Why don't you put out some content? And I was like, but what? She goes, I don't know. You have the data, find things that could potentially be interesting. So I did some Google researching, and we're talking 2015. So it's not like you go ChatGPT and find this. So you have to kind of like find stuff. And I found the state of startups that came from a publication based in Europe. And when you started to look at what they were putting, what industries, what countries, what stages, and they were the most simple things that we had because all of the information was available in the Excel spreadsheets that we created. So long story short, we started creating these infographic, and I credit this very much to my career. I was recently, I saw at the 20-year alumni of Oliver Wyman, the gentleman that kindly gave me an offer to join Oliver Wyman. And he was asking how Oliver Wyman and consulting had shaped my career. And I explained that when I started doing these infographics, and to this date, the research that we do, we take very complex subjects and bring them to very simple infographic design that the layman can understand and have a key takeaway from each of the charts.
And that's no easy feat. I know exactly that, no easy feat.
And so that became the essence of what MAGNiTT did using this data. And we started with one on the state of startups. There wasn't much content on funding. And if it was coming from VCs. So it was somewhat skewed to the incentive of the VC. So we created some funding content. We did a founders report. We did an M&A report. And ultimately, that's what became the journey towards where we are now. It was the lack of research, data, intelligence that decision makers were looking for was the space that we decided to try and fill.
Did anybody do that at the time, or you were kind of pioneering this at the time?
Globally, there were players.
No, here in the region.
There were entities that were doing more media.
Right.
So there were a lot of media platforms.
Marketing and media.
Media. WAMDA was around, ArabNet, the conferences, STEP conference. So there were several of the players that were doing event type organizations or focused on funding news, but very few, if not any, that were focused on the research, data, and intelligence side of that. And even though we pivoted in many ways, we were, I wanted to emulate LinkedIn. So it was more continuing the connectivity, but creating the job board. People might completely forget. There was a job board, apply to investors. We had a perk board. It's something that I find quite interesting now because governments are now creating these platforms. And every time I sit with them, I try to share all of the learning experiences that I had as to why it doesn't work. And that actually it's not a problem that you're solving for. I now have in my office, the only thing I have in my office on the wall is what problem are you solving for? And anytime people come with ideas or suggestions or what problem are you solving for? And if you're not solving for a problem, then nobody's asking for it. And so we were doing all of these things, and these have come from hard lessons. And the reality was there was not really getting too much traction. And then when COVID hit, we had started our online subscription model. But one of the almost sad blessings in disguise that came out of COVID was that when marketing, and we used to have a newsletter and lots of news and advertising, 50% of our revenue would come from advertising. When COVID hit, nobody wanted to advertise. There was nothing to advertise.
Of course, yeah.
And so then you had a almost requirement to find what did people want to pay for.
Oh, wow. So you did a business model innovation real time, live while you're doing. Wow.
What did people want to pay for?
Yeah.
And what we found was that they wanted to pay for the data. They wanted the research.
Of course.
They wanted the intelligence. They were not paying for the advertising. And hence we leaned into what we are now effectively the journey of an enterprise SaaS data research intelligence platform, and bit by bit just cut out all of the other elements that were not getting traction, not getting revenue, not getting demand, and just focused on what we're known for and what we continue to double down in.
Do you consider yourself an entrepreneur?
Yeah, for sure.
Of course, right?
Yeah.
What does entrepreneurship mean to you?
At its essence, you're creating efficiency where inefficiency exists. That's something that I like to consider more what a startup is, or a tech company.
Right.
A tech company, shall we say, I'll answer your question. A tech company tends to be an entity that creates efficiency where inefficiency exists using technology.
Right.
So when you look at payment platforms, inefficiency in the banking system. When you look at logistics, inefficiency in delivery. When it's food, inefficiency in bookings.
Right.
The entrepreneur is the person that takes the leap of faith to try and build something from scratch. I mean, ultimately, these are non-existing businesses that you are building from scratch and bringing the resources, the teams, the vision to be able to achieve that. And for me, that's what the entrepreneur is. It's not generational shifts. It's not corporate shifts. It's not government shifts. It's creating something from scratch that didn't exist before.
What's the biggest challenge you as an entrepreneur faced in your starting that still exists till today, according to your view and understanding of how this, especially here in our region?
I think that one is focus. Too many of us here in the region are distracted by noise, distracted by...
Focus of whom?
The product.
Founders.
The product.
Okay. The
focus of the product. I learned this through the dojo program we did with 500 startups. The guiding principle to all decisions is data. And we're a data company. Your data will tell you...
That's objectively true.
And you take away subjectivity. Subjectivity can be used for marketing. It can be used for storytelling. It can be used for presentation. But when it comes down to facts and figures, it's data that drives decision
I love what
making.
you're saying, because sometimes, I told you that one of the things that I do sort of corporate culture transformation, strategy retreats, all sorts of kind of inspecting what is the kind of root causes of the symptoms that these leaders in large organizations face, and then try to build the intervention plan and sort of go on with the fixes. More times than obviously all of us expect is when people come and say, oh no, but this is wrong. And I say, are you saying the data is wrong? Because this is data. And the moment you say this is data, you can sense that how everybody just calms down and they can't object it. They can't kind of even talk back at it, because it's like, it's your data. We did a survey. You were probably 500, 600 employees, at least 300 of you, 400 of you. So a significant number said 90% XYZ. Are you questioning the data or me, or what are you trying to do exactly? And then everything becomes smooth afterwards. And that's brilliant.
And I was trying to remember now, but I can't remember exactly. I used to have a quote on my wall, which was something like, without data, your opinion is just another fact. I can't remember, but it effectively saying that without data, it's just another opinion.
Exactly.
Facts and data. And you see this in anything that you do now. It's the stock markets, anything that you're looking in the financial markets, when people are giving opinions. It's why my team, I laugh, I get very frustrated, especially when we're writing research, that we use words that are verbose. So for instance, we see a surge in funding. A surge is non-quantifiable.
Yes, it's evaluative language rather than descriptive. Yep.
Is it 10%? Is it 100%? Like
I love that.
As a data company, we have the numbers. So let's not use
marketing
verbose language. Yeah. Sure, in a PR, you can say it's a record year. There's ways of kind of putting things in context, but at its core, big words like exponentially grew. What's exponential? A surge in funding. It was a great year. These are not words that are quantified. And as a research and data company, we have numbers and facts and figures. So the flip side of that, which is very difficult, and I did another podcast recently, and I said one of the biggest challenges for founders here in the region is that we need to learn the art of storytelling.
Right.
And storytelling can be very bland and boring when you're talking about data and research. You can get too bogged down in the numbers. And so it's a very difficult balancing act of telling a story and a journey through numbers, but making sure that the facts you are making are based in accurate information. And for me, that's extremely key and clear as to what we do with MAGNiTT. And it's one of the learning lessons that I try to share to all founders. My biggest tip to founders, or my biggest learning lesson, is that content marketing is some of the most powerful marketing that is underutilized in the region. There's a very successful startup with founders here who asked me maybe a year and a half ago, what type of content should we be doing for our marketing? You do a lot of marketing. And I kept on stressing, you have more data than the market does on your subject matter. I'm not going to call them out, but and they're very successful. But I never see any content around that. Why is it interesting? The media loves it. There's a lot of PR, there's a lot of press, a lot of people talking and telling stories, but they like facts and figures. People are attracted by numbers, facts, insights,
yes,
because we're now scrolling the internet and Instagram and social media. And yes, there's many ways of attracting people's attentions on social media, but facts, it can be clickbaity. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be selling a story or pushing an agenda, but in the facts and figures, those are the things that people remember afterwards. And I feel like in any industry, I mean, I know we're a data company. You can be in e-commerce, you can be in banking, you can
agriculture,
be in
whatever, yeah.
agriculture. Talk about the differences between X geography and X geography in water consumption.
Yes.
People will get interested, and it's completely underutilized, and people don't realize the information that they have, which can be shared at an aggregate level, is extremely powerful for the consumer or the end user.
It really grounds the thinking, right? It grounds the discussions. And I always say I never debate facts and data. And anyone who wants to debate facts and data, I just retreat and say, you know what? It's fine. No opinions. If I go to a company and do a bit of research on their own, let's say, culture and on their own performance, whatever growth blockers that they have, and then someone somewhere tries to be smart and argues with the data, I just look at the CEO and say, what is this about? Are we wasting our time here or not? Because it's either you're analyzing the data, but never question, because it's data, it's there. 1 + 1 = 2. Do you think the maturity of the region understands that, in your opinion? Because that needs a certain level of critical thinking, right?
Again, that's a loaded question. I mean, maturity of the region, we can talk about, or if we're talking about in entrepreneurship, or we're talking about the region, that's...
Okay, juxtapose it with, let's say, San Francisco.
Yeah, if you're talking about tech, I think that there is a growing maturity in the tech space, because I'm not going to talk about politics, I'm not going to talk about academia.
We're talking about VC,
So in that space, I think that there is a growing appetite for research and data, but it is not used to the level that we see in Silicon Valley or in mature markets like the US and Europe. That's not to say that VCs, for instance, aren't using data, but I'm sure that they are, and I'm sure that they have to. But the consumption of data is at a different level. Now, the counter argument to that is you've got several decades of data history to work with in the US and Europe.
Right.
Whereas here, it's shallow because there's only 10 years. The second thing is the availability of data in the US and Europe, which is effectively our daily challenge, is to get more data on MAGNiTT that can be beneficial for our users, is much harder to get than in more open, transparent, less opaque environments like the US and Europe. Now, I'm not complaining, that's our opportunity to kind of develop.
Yeah.
But for those two things, you have less of a track record for which to do regression or predictive analysis. We often get asked by government, can you give us some predictions by sector, by industry? If you take 10 years of venture, you had a straight line going like this, and then a complete decline post-COVID. That's not very good for regression testing.
Right, of course.
Now we're back up on another trajectory. Take 20 or 30 years worth of data, and you have a dot-com boom, you have a 2008 crash, you have venture capital and exits that kick in. You can start applying certain methods and models that can be used to predict emerging market versus data that's available in the US or Europe as a benchmark. So one of the key things that, why do we cover Africa and Southeast Asia? Because they have provided us benchmarks of alternative ecosystems for which we can benchmark the Middle East.
Right.
Southeast Asia is maybe 5 to 6 years more advanced in terms of venture capital investment. That is just about a cycle's worth of data that we can compare. There really is no comparison to the US. I always get asked, okay, but can you compare X geography to the US? I'm like, why? It's completely irrelevant.
It's wrong.
Right?
Yeah.
It's can you compare it to the UK? Why? UK venture as an asset class has been around for at least 30, 40 years. You can't compare a 10-year or 5-year ecosystem to something that has been around for 30 to 40 years. You can compare it to Singapore, which is around 15 years. You can compare it to Indonesia and Malaysia.
What can't you compare exactly, Philip?
I think exits, you
Right.
can't look
Number of
at
exits.
Number of exits, return on investments,
Why?
fund structures.
So if we say, for example, we compare exits for, let's say, between here, London, San Francisco, and Singapore. So here in Singapore is one bucket, London and UK and US, or let's say San Francisco and London in one bucket. what exactly is wrong? I'm not saying that we should or we shouldn't. I'm just exploring with you. Why is it like, because it sounds like it's unequivocally wrong, or is it like incorrect, or how? Well,
they're not the right benchmarks, because like any ecosystem evolution, if you take DPI, if you look at exit multiples, it's very difficult.
Right. Okay. Well, I get that. So okay. So let me kind of drill deep on that. Exit multiples, I 100% agree with you, because there's infinite number of other variables that affect the exit multiple, the market size, the maturity, the consumers, the businesses, the capital, everything around that, right? The potential in the exit, the number of options, all of that obviously have a massive impact and effect on the multiples. So that I get. But generally speaking, if we measure, now not to kind of comparison from a vanity metrics perspective, as in, oh, we have this and that, just as a tracking and as sort of a, not from a benchmark perspective, as in good and bad, high or low, not sort of evaluatively, but just to understand where we are at today. And if we control for other elements, let's say population, GDP, number of founders, if we control for that, wouldn't that make a good analysis at some point in time? So, especially that we have VCs coming from there investing actually within our startups here.
So let me reframe it. It's not that you can't benchmark them. Of course you can benchmark them. Is it the most relevant benchmark, or are there other geographies that are similar in maturity that you have greater learning lessons from?
Okay.
That's my point.
Yeah.
So Southeast Asia as an ecosystem, just why do I harp on about it? Singapore, 5 million population, UAE, 10 million population, both of which are the centers of capital to a certain extent for the headquarters of many of their companies.
True.
In terms of tech, that is not a scalable country. You need to be in the millions of tens of millions and the hundreds of millions. Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Egypt, multiple geographies in MENA. MENA is made up of 19 geographies, 350 million population. You look at Southeast Asia, multiple geographies, Taiwan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, etc. Challenges, very similar. Different demographics, different purchasing power, different politics. Those are similar markets in terms of comparisons for tech, in terms of the opportunities and the challenges that they're facing. Sovereign wealth funds, GIC, Temasek. There's a lot that we learn. If you take the top 10, if not the top 5 sovereign wealth funds in the world, we're talking about the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund, but then you're talking about Temasek, GIC, Mubadala, PIF.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's similarities in the government focus of diversification and the fund structures that they've created. When you compare it to the US, single country, India, China, US have comparable learning lessons. Right. All of them are big states. People talk about America, the states, each one is like a different country. But the reality is, from a legalistic perspective, there is precedent. There is an overarching. Those are things that are completely different here. So I come from that perspective. What are LATAM could be a point of comparison, albeit it's very different.
Latin America.
Latin America is very different to where we are, but it could be interesting for Africa as a point of comparison, if Africa wanted to compare. Reliance on US investment and funding. Africa, reliance on French, European Union development funding for the subcontinent as an ecosystem. So there are points of comparisons. And I think that for me is what's most interesting, is how can you find relevant points of benchmarking is different. Sure, you can benchmark against all of these geographies, but even then, aspirationally, how do you aspire to be the US, which is completely different when there are probably, it's like playing a video game. I'm looking at your Nintendo over here. Before you get to level 100, you need to go through level 1 to 99, right? So what is the level 10 that you need to get to then graduate to level 20, to then graduate to level 30? And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to bridge, is kind of greater granularity of insights and intelligence in comparable geographies to the ones that we're operating in, which, for what it's worth, are some of the fastest growing, most interesting, some of the most differentiated products that you can get. So there's a lot of positives that come out of it. But again, there's always a bias towards Silicon Valley, the US. And
People romanticize about those because it's just, it makes headlines, everybody's talking about it. We speak mostly in the business language in this part of the world, English. So that's sort of where everybody's news is coming from. But I think while you were talking, I couldn't help but differentiate between purpose, let's say goal, target, aspiration, where we want to reach, and then methodology. And, and this is where I need to explore with you. Do you think that we're hooked on methodology when we talk about these things? Or because in a globalized world, you have Kita. Kita is the coming here from all over the world and is disrupting our local companies. So if we're not comparing, understanding, becoming aware, especially awareness from a either juxtaposition perspective, so putting them next to each other and just seeing, because the races, it doesn't matter if you're here in China, in Europe, in the States, it's an open market, it's a globalized market, and we're even more getting into that kind of realm of competition that if we actually don't keep ourselves grounded in the grand scheme of how the VC landscape and the kind of economic landscape worldwide, don't you think that methodically might get us hurt from a purpose or achieving our goals perspective?
So I think, in fact, aspiration is one of the biggest credits of geography, specifically here in the GCC. You can't fault when it comes to technology and innovation, the aspiration of where they would like to be. But I think sometimes aspiration, several steps to get there, the same analogy, right? You aim for the stars, you fall on the trees, you aim for the trees, you land on the floor. And it's one of the sayings that I find extremely powerful, is that you really aim high. And so you can't fault anyone who starts up in a part of the world that never really kind of had technology as its core proposition. We're in a natural resource part of the world. And I really applaud all the founders that have started in the region, because some say that if you can do it here, you could do it anywhere. I'm pretty sure you'd say that in most of the geographies. But the challenges that you're facing here, where venture capital was non-existent until about 10 years ago, where you were working against governments that were potentially competing with what it is that you're trying to build. Innovation was only really embraced since 2014-15 as a concept. Fragmentation. So on an aspirational level, I think that aspirations are...
It's against all odds, right?
But that's high. I think aspiration now is very high here in the region. Methodology, I think, is extremely solid. I think that there's two things. One is patience. We are impatient, naturally so, because we all want everything now, when in reality, Silicon Valley was not created in 10 years. Not that I'm trying to compare to Silicon Valley, but all of these mature markets started in the 1940s and 50s. And the generational intellectual capital that gets built, the learning lessons that get built, the ecosystems that get developed around these type of concepts are generational shifts and developments, which allows them to be nimble. And so we're now entering that second decade of the market that is beginning to see the evolution into more mature conversation. We met recently at an event, and one of the things I've been quite vocal about in the last couple of months with regards to events is that if we want to grow as an ecosystem, we now need to be more comfortable with being uncomfortable with regards to the truths and the challenges, so that we can find solutions to them. My point was not that I want people to be critical, but how do we find the underlying root causes or be transparent around the challenges so that the wider market can find solutions to solve them? And in every case, we are pretty aware of what some of those challenges are, but how do we try to solve them to have tangible growth in the market? So I think that patience concept is part of the challenge, because it takes time. The second one is just monetary, it's ROI. We've yet to see the flywheel of return of investments yet for many of the companies that have been building. Right. I think I made the point at the talk that a typical tech company takes 7 to 8 years to exit based on historical data. And in recent years, because of the lack of exits and the slowdown of the IPO markets and the inability for companies to get bought by international players, we've seen a decline in the number of transactions that are happening and an increase in the number of years it takes to exit. Now, that window of companies that were invested in 2015, 16, 17, 18, when venture started growing here in the region, has coincided with this venture capital slowdown that we've seen in the last 3 to 4 years. And therefore, if you don't have, what gives investors appetite to take bigger risks?
Of course, returns. Right.
The more returns you get, the bigger the appetite.
If my
to take
$1 becomes $5 in this amount of time, and I'm able to kind of confidently assess that.
Then you have bigger bets
of course.
More
but
long-term
what's making
industry.
investors not believe in that?
In which part?
In that kind of confidence in the future of returns in this region?
I don't think that's the problem. It's just a matter of exits. Like, they need the return of investment. So many of the funds are now doing their 4th and 5th funds or 3rd funds in certain cases. So they have strong belief in the industry. If you're talking about the LPs, well, the LPs have other opportunity costs.
Right.
And I think this is something that sometimes we forget. I always remember the story from a STEP conference where one of the premier still does the conferences here in the region. They used to have an excellent format, which was a debate. And they had 3 investors and they had 3 founders on stage. And it's one of the things that I still remember to this day. And they were talking about the challenges of fundraising. And so they were talking to founders, and we're talking 2018 or 19 was the year that this happened, probably 18. Lack of funding, difficult for companies to do fundraising here in the region, etc. And it was one investor, it's public, so Danny from Biko Capital, and I still remember it, and I'm a good friend of Danny's now, was talking about, and it was the first time that I heard someone say, you founders are complaining about fundraising from us investors, but I think you sometimes, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, forget that we have investors. We have been mandated to invest this capital from LPs, and therefore it's not charity. We have an obligation.
Yeah.
We have an obligation as GPs in this fund to return a certain threshold of investment. Otherwise, they invest in real estate. Otherwise, they invest
asset classes.
Other asset classes.
Exactly.
And so sometimes you need to backward engineer the concept of what is venture capital.
Yeah.
And it is an asset allocation, like a portfolio. You've got your stocks, you've got your fixed income, you've got your real estate.
Your gold, Forex, whatever. Yeah.
Now, Larry Fink, BlackRock advocates 20% should go to alternatives. What is alternatives? We've been at MAGNiTT very dear. What is alternative investments? It's private capital. What is private capital? Within private capital,
there's the VC.
VC, private equity,
M&A,
real estate, infrastructure, private credit. So even within the realms of the 20%, it is a section.
Right.
And what you're effectively advocating is that outperforms all of the others by multiples. And therefore, my point is not that the investors don't believe it, but they've yet to see it necessarily. Now, some of the funds are beginning to report their DPIs, and you're seeing that they're in line with global benchmarks, which is extremely positive. But the reality is that, for instance, we've only seen the big exits of Kareem, Souk. The rest of the M&A activity has been relatively muted.
Right.
Huge amount of discussions now around IPOs in the region to create that flywheel, but it's not yet happened. So once we start seeing that happen, and the learning lesson that I've been relatively transparent about in Southeast Asia, when you look at the fund of funds and the sovereign wealth funds, their biggest challenge has been a lack of exits in the Southeast Asian ecosystem because of that return of investment towards the founders, the GPs, the LPs. And so they've pulled back a lot of their recent funding. In fact, one of them has just invested in the region as opposed to investing in Southeast Asia. And that has brought down a decline of venture capital investment in Southeast Asia as we track it. And it is one of those, exactly to the previous conversation that we're having, a comparable point of reference that can be shared with government agencies here to say, this is happening in Southeast Asia. It's not like the LPs in the US who are endowment funds and listed company, very different. We're talking about sovereign wealth fund. That's comparable to the sovereign wealth funds here, who have fueled much of the
completely different metric for decision making. Yeah.
So to answer your question, for me, those are two things: patience, and then the return of investment.
So let me kind of quickly touch on patience, because the way I see it is, it's sort of, I wouldn't say wrong or right. It's not about wrong or right. It's not black and white. It's kind of much more nuanced than that. But I love the saying that says, a smart person learns from their own mistakes. A wise person learns from the mistakes of others, right? So the idea here is, we have enough data to learn from everything that those people took for, 30, 40, 50 years. We don't have to kind of go through 30, 40, 50 years of learning. Now, I understand culture doesn't change quickly. It's kind of the kind of critical mass that has to change. I understand that, but still, we're in the internet age, the social media age, the AI age. Now you have company. Actually, I was just reading a report that says the kind of unicorn time, instead of 7 years, now it's shrunk to 3 to 4 years or even less.
In AI now, but yes.
Because so the idea here is, things are accelerating at a pace where someone could argue with the patience concept as like, okay, I could be patient, but I'm pretty sure someone somewhere will actually just regionally or sort of collectively outpace us. How do you respond to that argument?
Firstly, I'm saying that, like, you can't take 70 years and put it into 10, but there's levels of acceleration that's been taking place here. I mean, the rate of growth here has been very strong, specifically in the last 4 or 5 years. But again, if you haven't had that return of investment that creates more risk appetite to invest in new areas, you can't force that.
Yeah.
There's also, and to all of the credit of government that have been spearheading innovation, you can't push government unless they choose to want to change regulation, infrastructure. There's certain things that I've just come to appreciate are well above our pay grades and well above our heads that you can't influence and change.
Like what?
The licensing structures of a country, the employment contracts and requirements. There's some things that you can't just change. If you had a wand to cut down bureaucracy and cut down costs, sure, you'd do them.
Especially costs. Yeah.
But there are structures and there's history towards all of those different things, and you can't just change them overnight. That you can't change law. I mean, for instance, take in Saudi Arabia, they're trying to change capital gains law, taxation. Now that's happening. So the government can be credited for changing something.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen
overnight.
It goes through councils, it goes through legal reviews, policy, it has to go through policy, it needs to be brought into law, it goes through a revision process. So as a point in case, even where there is goodwill, you can have all the learning lessons and all the consulting firms and all the legal firms coming and doing it, but it still takes time to come to fruition. The CMA just announced that they were changing the acceptance of foreign ownership in stock exchange. Yeah. But again, that takes time to come into effect. It doesn't happen immediately. So again, the will is there. It goes back to the aspiration. The aspiration is clear. I mean, I just came from Qatar. The aspiration in Qatar to grow the tech ecosystem and the development of venture there is huge, but it takes time to develop. And it is probably happening at a much faster rate than if we had this conversation 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So for sure, things can be done quickly. And there's a lot of learning lessons. But where are you taking the learning lessons from? It's very easy to say, oh, but in the US, this is the law. But it's a completely different legal structure. It's a completely different political structure. So you can't just, it's not copy paste.
Yeah.
It takes time to iterate. And I think that's what I mean by kind of the patience of that being developed. And one of the things that I think, again, goes to the being comfortable, being uncomfortable is the lobbying concept, that it's very important to work with the government. And I'm very fortunate to be in a position where I have good relationships with the government, but you have to advise and support and provide the data, the facts, the figures, the case studies, and also just appreciate they're also working on many other things.
It's a bigger kind of fish to fry for them. Yeah.
Startups, tech, and venture is not the top thing on every government's agenda in this part of the world. There are many things.
It's the biggest. realistically speaking, it's the biggest contributor to an economic growth because it punches way above its weight class, if that makes sense. Because if you look at the kind of value creation from thin air, it traditionally and genuinely happens from entrepreneurship, like you mentioned initially. So if you care for it, yes, it's a small market, but then the result, the impact of it, the butterfly effect of it, it's just crazy.
And that's a long tail investment.
It is a long-term
investment. If you look at it now, what's the
exactly.
contribution of GDP that'll come from these tech companies?
Not it.
The
like you
future
said.
growth.
Yes.
And this is where I say that there's
it's very difficult.
In venture,
it's a delayed gratification, right?
In venture and entrepreneurship, there is a massive problem of KPIs.
Okay.
So founders have a 10-year KPI to exit.
Okay.
Investors have a 6 to 7 year fund horizon.
The exit horizon, yeah.
For their horizon.
Yeah.
When you're working with governments, let's say for the sake of argument in the US, you have 4-year political cycles. In other areas, people still have a 10-year. Their KPIs might be slightly longer, but they still need to present to a minister. They still need to present to people on growth on a 12 to 18 month. And when you're working with corporates, it's a 6-month, 12-month business fiscal year target.
True.
And so when you're trying to put all of these things together, what your goal is versus what your client's goal is versus what a lobbying goal is going to be versus your investor's goal are somewhat differentiated. And so you need to always put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're kind of dealing with to understand what is their KPI, what's their objective, and why is it maybe difficult for you to get that through or change or enact that change. And I think that's something that for venture here, like you have a 7, 8 year, 9 year goal to exit, and that's your objective, if not longer. So what you want to change isn't necessarily aligned with the person that's on the other side.
Which is funding you and wants to kind of, but okay. So let me quickly double down on a concept, which is innovation, obviously, and entrepreneurship and innovation are two faces of the same coin, right? Because it's all about taking risks. It's all about creating new things that excites people, that makes people go out of their way to change their lives and probably pay for it in the process. Lots of innovation and vis-a-vis entrepreneurship are affected by 4 main sort of, I would say, propellers: government and policy, capital, culture, and talent. So government and policy, capital, culture, general culture, whether it's corporate culture or general macro culture, and talent. Which one do you think is the weakest link here in our region?
What was the beginning of the question?
So innovation and entrepreneurship are two faces of the same coin. And the propellers for those innovations and entrepreneurship are 4.
Yeah.
Right?
So I think that you say government and...
So government policy.
I say market size. So one of the biggest challenges here in the region is market size. And it comes up in every conversation.
Yes.
We can talk about talent, and talent is not a problem in the region. I think there's a huge amount of talent. The problem is tech talent is different. And what I mean by tech talent...
But it's a talent magnet, right?
You can. So we're seeing that happening now.
Right.
But what I mean by tech talent is not engineers. I mean people who have worked in tech companies.
Right.
It's very different finding the best person at an investment bank and the best person that worked at a legal firm. But to get them to work at a high-paced tech company that is kind of innovating is a very different mindset.
Absolutely.
But for me, it's market size. It goes back to what we were talking about, the different
government
geographies.
and policy at a macro level, not singling anything.
It's market access, and it's the government and policy challenge of every geography. So if you are based in Dubai and you need to scale to Saudi, it's a different license, it's a different jurisdiction, it's a different headquarter.
Regulation,
You want to go to Egypt, it's a completely different demographic. It's a different,
different tax system, different everything.
We saw from the stories of Kareem, like if we go back to the Uber Kareem, and it was a case study. It's an amazing case study. But how many governments didn't allow them to operate within their jurisdictions?
Yes.
How many times did they lobby in each new market? The challenges with the licensing authorities and each one is an exercise to get into. And we've seen great ways that Kareem effectively beat the Uber challenge working with the regulators. But that is a problem, because we go back to the US, there's precedent. One state, another state, each state, there's differences, but there's precedents. Language is not a challenge. It's a single language that you're operating in. Here, you might have different dialect, but also kind of nuances to the culture. Especially if you're then venturing into other Islamic countries. You want to go to Turkey, you want to go to Pakistan. Each one is a different. And we go back to the point we made. The scalability in venture is what makes it attractive for investors. The inefficiency that is being solved for and the efficiency that's being created, the exponential value is in that scale. And if you do not have that scale, it is one of the biggest deterrents for why people invest in that asset
That's a full circle. And that's a deadlock.
So that has become one of the biggest challenges of the growth, which is why now I've been doing this for 10 years. At the beginning, it was you wanted to become the tech company for a country. Then I remember the dawn of the Kareem Souk era, you wanted to become the biggest MENA startup. But I think what we've realized in the last couple of years, there are certain geographies that it does not make sense, data, economically, to be operating in those geographies. They are loss leading geographies when you do not have a guaranteed next venture investment round to scale into just to acquire users. And so people pull back from many geographies that didn't make sense. Does it make sense
because
to be
customer acquisition is impractical?
Too high, impractical for the margins and the type of product that you're providing. So then people start focusing on higher margin geographies, Saudi Arabia, UAE, for high income, high digital penetration, high usage, etc.
Whether B2B or B2C, you're right.
So then what has now evolved? People are beginning to go global, if not pan-emerging. How do you operate in Turkey, Indonesia, Saudi, UAE, Singapore? You start cherry picking geographies that make economic sense. How can a technology company look to operate in Europe? The US potentially, but how do you have a slightly more global outlook to the growth of the company, whether it's organically or inorganically, where we've started to see Middle Eastern companies acquiring equivalent companies in Europe, the US, LATAM, Africa, Southeast Asia, to get to inorganic growth and size to meet the holy grail, which is what everyone's talking about, IPOing and listing at a size that makes it interesting to be able to do so. But this has been the evolution, but the challenge has been born out of the market size, which I think was the question that you asked.
Yes. But that's, thinking about it, because every time I think and speak to founders and VCs and investors, whether angel or institutional, this topic keeps on coming over and over and over again. Cross-border transactions, customer acquisition challenges. And the one thing that probably I wouldn't subscribe to that you mentioned is different cultures. It's probably the same culture, the same people, the same language. There are nuances, but it's not too big. It's like the nuance between New York and, Las Vegas. It's still one people, one kind of... But okay, so let's do this exercise. Let's look at the pipeline of those companies, starting from pre-seed, an idea, PowerPoint that goes into a seed, that goes into a Series A. Now we have revenue, probably negative EBITDA. Then you go to Series B. Now you have profitability. Now you have growth. You have probably 50, 60 people in your team. Then you go to Series C, if you're lucky, but now you're thinking about either IPO, if you're lucky, or M&A or whatever, and then Series D and beyond and the exit options that you have. If you X-ray all of this, where's the bottleneck? Do you see like an influx? Because I see there are lots of influx here, but then like kind of a dripping from here.
So we have a whole report on this, which is what we call the funnel analysis. And we took the all seed companies that have all companies that have received seed investment in the last 10 years.
You're talking about VC markets, so
VC markets.
Bootstrapping and some, not part of it.
Not part of it.
Right.
Seed.
Enough. Yeah, fair enough.
Well, we had to base it on something.
Right,
so
right.
the data
fair
that we
enough.
had
Yes.
was
because that's
seed
a benchmark,
investments.
Right? Exactly.
And so any company that have received at least the minimum of a seed investment in the last 10 years.
What's a seed investment?
The first check.
No, I know. What's the kind of, what qualifies to be a seed investment? Is it the first check or is it
the first check after an angel investment round?
Right. Okay. So a first institutional check.
Correct.
Okay.
And
whatever the size is. Could be 10 million. Whatever the size is. Right.
Well, yes. I mean, sometimes.
I know.
That's a whole different subject. But yes, there are benchmarks and averages that we
can have
on
opinions
the
there.
It's not, you can have an opinion on what's an actual seed round. And sometimes, and don't believe everything you read in the press. That's why we moved away from media and into data. And that's an interesting point. I mean, this happens in the region. And this is what we talk about being comfortable, being uncomfortable. Don't believe everything that you read. So for instance, we will get a press release. MAGNiTT, this is how we verify our data, for instance. And this is how we're very different to our competitors, that we believe that we're much more granular, and why sometimes our data is considered as more conservative. We will receive an email that says $15 million seed round.
Mega seed round, right?
We know that an average seed round, based on all historical data that we have, is 3.5 million, for the sake of argument.
Really? 3.5?
I'm throwing it for the sake of argument. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but yeah.
Because I thought it's sub-million, but anyway, yeah, I'll take it.
Anything that gets flagged outside of an average,
as an outlier, you mean,
gets flagged to our data team.
Right.
That will then review the investment deal and reach out to the founder and or investor to understand, is this fresh capital injection? Does it include venture debt? Is there secondary transactions, i.e. not fresh capital, but capital for the exchange of shares, incorporated in that headline figure? And more often than not, if they're willing to disclose,
cleaning the cap table,
but the number is a reflection of the capital exchange, not fresh capital investment into an organization.
Is that true? Yeah. They do that?
Yeah.
Just to inflate the number and
not to inflate the number. The headline number is that is the number.
It reminded me. I used to work at the events industry. I was the show director of one of the biggest tech shows in the region for 2 years in a row, and every time I had the paper that shows the numbers, there were always two numbers: actual numbers and media numbers, and I had to sign on it. And because I was a show director, I'm the only one who's allowed to see it. Of course, starting from me and then my superiors. And I always wondered, like, why are we doing this? And then I scrutinized the media number, and it's a number, but it includes repeat, it includes media, it includes even the exhibitors, everybody. Like, even if you have a cat and a dog, it counts everything. And then you use that number in the media. Oh, wow.
This is a problem that we had recently. I was speaking to a client, and they said it was really interesting. The reason that we value your data is because it seems that it's always more comprehensive. And I said, well, what do you mean it seems? He says, well, give me an example. He says, look, to be fair, we looked at an international platform and we looked at your data. And for the sake of argument, we were looking at total amount of investments in geography X. Interestingly, the international provider had more capital deployed.
Reported.
Or roughly the same amount, but a little bit higher.
Gotcha.
For that geography in a year.
Right. You mean reported, right?
Correct.
Right.
Except they had X number of transactions, 7 for the sake of argument. You had 18.
Okay.
So the comprehensiveness of that data means that it wasn't skewed by a few big deals that may have had the issue that we were just mentioning. Venture debts included. M&A, sometimes they include the transaction value as part of it. Yeah. Secondary transactions that get included into it. We will always verify to try and make sure that there's a consistent methodology, that it is only the equity exchange portion of that problem. Now, your funnel question, sorry, because I digressed. I weaved.
No. Let me first double down on this. I remember the funnel question. Don't worry, I'll get back to that. But this is important, and I think everyone from the audience, and I think everyone needs to know this. And this is part of us being uncomfortable. I'm not talking about calling anybody out, but I'm just talking about applying critical thinking, because this is massive in my opinion. Because if you're making decisions based on these numbers, you ought to know the kind of granularity of these numbers, because what if your decision is off by 100 points just because these numbers are inflated or kind of included, and that's dangerous.
So we're very dear. I think this is one of the things that we're always dear about is the accuracy of the data.
The integrity, right?
The integrity of the data and the accuracy of the data.
Because it's all about reliability, validity, and integrity of the data
100%.
that makes the data actually useful for decision making, not for hype or LinkedIn
and
likes.
Look, you really want to go into the AI world. This is one of the biggest problems with AI.
Yes.
AI is extremely powerful. I mean, everyone's using it. I use it. Everyone's using it for different purposes. But if you rely on without sourcing, without understanding the reliability of where that information came from, which is most likely a public headline.
Yes.
Because that's the system that is
or
generated.
Reddit post.
Or a Reddit post. You are relying on inaccurate data, which is why internally for us...
Not just inaccurate, wrong.
Wrong. Sure. And we are a data company.
Yes.
That adds research, data, and analytics on top of it.
Absolutely.
We are junk in, junk out. We're the ones that are providing, ideally not the junk, but the cleaner information. But if you take junk in, you take junk out. And I think this is one of the challenges in AI, which is why many of the companies are now incorporating AI as part of a solution to ensure that it sits on top of the proprietary clean data.
Right. So it's not garbage in, garbage out.
Correct.
Right.
But you're not feeding the public machine with all of your data. You're creating solutions or integrating your data into a client solution that's proprietary.
Yes.
But if you rely on your $50 subscription, I guarantee you that information is incorrect.
I'll tell you what, I would actually bet everything that I have on that 90% of, because I've tested it myself. Obviously, we're using AI every day. You can never trust AI, not just because it lies or it's hallucinating. That's basic. That's old story. It's exactly what you said. It's when they report something, and sometimes they source the report, and you go to the source and you find that number accurate.
Or inaccurate. Because that source has taken it from something
that's what I'm trying to say. So the reference is right. So the number, let's say 10 million.
Right,
the reference is right. You think, oh, that's it. Okay, fine. It came from whatever.com website is there. But then read the article itself and understand. And more times than I would actually like, the article doesn't say anything about the granularity of that number. It's just hype. It's just kind of, clickbait, and that's it. And you'll go inside some sort of quotes from the founders and the VCs, and that's it. And you can't base decisions, especially if you're a founder, if you're a VC, and most definitely not a policymaker or government, based on those data. And it has to be coming from an integral source, which is absolutely reliable, that takes reliability and validity of the data and the granularity of the data and the unpacking of the data really seriously, right?
And what's fascinating, and I spent a lot of time thinking about this, the public markets don't have room for opaqueness, because you're talking about
the public can't,
but public market can't.
The public market can't, because it's audited.
It's audited. It's instant. It's transparent.
Right.
The private market, where that's not required, and there is a lack of regulatory bodies reporting it, and it's 6 to 9 month reporting cycles or 12-month reporting cycles. So it's historical, is where this opaqueness, and hence the opportunity. But the reality is that's the challenge. That is the problem that you're solving for in any of the private market spaces.
That's fundamentally foundational to a successful ecosystem that relies on growth and aspirational sort of targets, right? So let's go back to our funnel, right? Yeah. So we talked about the kind of, and we digressed exactly when we started talking about the mega kind of seed. And I thank you for this, because it's really important, this digression, because it's actually awareness and education for people and information. So we're talking about the seed and the check of the seed. Yeah.
So we were looking at that, and we brought out a report that basically looked at starting with the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, and then we benchmarked Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia.
For the seed.
The progression. How many companies that have raised a seed round had then gone on to raise a Series A round that had then gone on to raise a Series B round?
And you define those? by
as a funnel. Just each time.
institutional.
Institutional investment at each round.
So the definition of the round was not based on the amount. It was based on the institutional round as per the regulatory body of the country.
Not regulatory body. No. It's us, because there's no regulation around this. This is about
what demarcates
the sequencing of investment rounds.
What demarcates the sequencing between 1 and 2?
That's a great question. There isn't one. This is just the
really?
industry.
I thought
not
there
really.
is.
I mean,
because
the nomenclature that exists is made up. What is Series A, B, C, D?
Oh, that's what I'm trying to say. So if we go now to whether it's DIFC or ADGM or otherwise, you have to quote unquote announce that you're raising because you're receiving capital. So that capital, no,
not really, no. Not from a regulatory body, and
I saw the policy.
There's no nomenclature that you have to say if it's Series A.
No. That's not that. Okay, so I get that. What I'm trying to say is, if you're receiving, or if you're in the market to receive a lump sum of money that is not invoiced, quote unquote, because transaction is an anti-money laundering and
yes.
Counter-terrorism financing and all those kind of regulatory sort of policies that exist in most of the countries, if not all of the countries. You need to declare that, you know what, I'm in the market now, I'm in the investment market, and I'm raising now.
But this is on a brokerage level.
On a licensing level, no? Because if I'm correctly remembering, and obviously this needs to be fact checked, it's not my opinion, and I could be wrong here, but I remember reading in the, let's say, ADGM regulations, when you want to raise money, you have to let ADGM know. So now they tell you, okay, fine, now you will receive. And once you receive, because now you will add either equity or even if it's safe or whatever, you can then report that this money is coming from these sources, like source of funds and all of that and analysis. And that's especially for institutional, but also for, I know that angel investors are strictly kind of...
I don't know. I didn't know that there's a regulation around that. Specifically, I'm not aware.
So
I'm talking about just the sequencing of investment rounds.
Okay.
So I'm purely looking at it as an academic. You've raised seed, you're doing your Series A, you're going to your Series B, you're going to your Series C, as a sequencing of investment rounds that are one larger than the other. The standard kind of VC model of bridge rounds are excluded from it, so it has to be a sequential investment round. And that was how the funnel was created.
What defines a bridge round?
Good question. I don't think it's specific. If you're at Series A and you're raising a $50 million round and then you do a $2 million investment bridge, it is neither a seed round because you've progressed towards a Series A, and it's a small enough round that it's not going to be a Series C. So a bridge, by pure virtue of the name, is bridging you from one round to the other, and there is no mathematical that's why I'm telling you, it's not there's no mathematical formula that says this is
mostly
a bridge and this is not.
Lines in the sand, right?
But exactly. This is an investment round that is usually not public. You never see press releases for bridge rounds.
Yes.
Companies that are raising bridge rounds are not going out and advertising, I needed an extra $2 million to get me to my next round.
That's actually a disadvantage, because I finished my oxygen in the tank. I need a
little bit more of a hit to get to the next
because
round.
I didn't manage my sort of burn rate well. So it's not actually appealing.
So there's no definition, I'm sure there's a definition somewhere if you chat GPT it, but effectively it's a smaller investment round to bridge you to the next investment round.
So going back to the sequencing and how you're...
So on average, companies in the region, 8% of companies, 7.5 to 8% of companies, depending on the geography, have graduated from doing a seed round to a Series A round. Only.
7%.
7%.
So you're talking about 93% that what happens to them?
Don't.
So
don't
what do
raise
they
a
do?
Series A after having raised a seed round.
So either they die or they just stay small.
Fail. Exits are very far and few between. So maybe 1% of those companies. The rest are likely to either be dormant, zombie, or have died. That's why venture and tech companies.
That rhymes with the VC market, kind of 93%, 90%.
And I think it's around less than 1%. And I think the highest is in Saudi, have graduated to a Series D. So while you read the headlines, and this is the bit that people forget, while you'll read the headlines of Tabi and you'll hear Steak and you'll hear Tamara,
and Ninja,
these are the less than 1% of all of the companies that had received an original seed round of investment. And that's how challenging this funnel is. And so the bottleneck is not necessarily a bottleneck. I like to say that there's a challenge at every stage
Right.
of the funnel, depending on who you're speaking to. I can argue that there's a lack of later stage capital because predominantly the VCs in the region have focused on earlier stage over late stage. And by virtue of the fact of the size of the ticket sizes, usually it's private equity, large institutions.
That's at later stages.
At later stage. But you're asking where the problem
Right.
is. And so there's a lot of arguments around the later stage
Right.
capital being probably the biggest bottleneck. There's an argument for and against that versus
Is it lack
early
of
stage.
capital or lack of funds established to?
The lack of capital comes from a lack of funds, appetite, or good companies that are able to raise. So there's everything is a double-sided
Yeah.
marketplace. There are the companies. So are there good enough companies? And I'm not an investor, so I can't speak to the quality of the companies. But that's one of the arguments that you sometimes hear from investors. And are there enough investors that actually have the capital to deploy there? Where we know that if the biggest funds here, the biggest fund was STV at one point, which is $500 million. Well, if you're raising Series D and each investment round was $100 million, how many investments can they do?
Right.
And now we've matured a long way from where we were when they were the biggest fund in 2018 when they launched, right? And the other thing is, let's not forget, and sometimes we forget, that historically, and when we were tracking it, late stage investment for the likes of Kareem, when we looked at Amazon, Souk, these were
Property Finder as
Property
well.
Finder.
Yeah.
They were international players.
Right.
Now we're beginning to see the emergence of these international companies setting up here in the region. General Atlantic, which has made several investments. KKR, that's made an investment. Blackstone, BlackRock. They're all beginning to play here in the region and starting to set up offices here. But go back 3-4 years, none of them had made transactions in the region. And so by virtue of the fact that the ticket sizes tend to be bigger and institutional regional investors are unable to fill those tickets, you're relying on the international market. But less than 1% of them even get to that point.
Okay, so let's start and kind of zoom in and have an X-ray kind of examination to the seed to Series A, because most of the funds that fund seed also fund Series A, right? I mean, most of the funds,
Not all of them.
Not all of them, but most of them. I mean, every time I see a fund in the realm of between 70 and 120, that's usually a seed to Series A, seed and Series A. I know Beko has their own 120. I know what's the other one? Lab Ventures also has their own seed to Series A.
Because it's opportunistic. If a good company comes, you don't want to limit yourself.
Exactly.
You know what we were talking about the maturity of the market.
Right.
We're talking about the US.
Yes.
Funds, not only are they defined by the ticket size that they do, they are sector focused, they're geography focused. That's maturities where there are that many funds that actually at each level, there is enough funds to fin the funnel. Each sector, we don't even have that many. There are some that are now creating prop tech funds, fintech funds, AI funds have popped up left, right, and center. But for a long time, every fund was generalist because there wasn't enough agnostic for any industry. And so
that's hurting the industry, isn't it?
It's not hurting it. It's no, not at all. It's just the evolution of the industry.
I think
there hasn't been enough appetite, return, and companies to justify a focus in one specific sector.
I think again, this is my perspective. I think agnostic funds genuinely hurt the entire ecosystem because you don't know how to evaluate and how to understand the potential of that industry, that market, and that founder's potential. But how would you know? I mean, you can't be everywhere.
But that's not the fault of the fund.
Well, okay.
So it's who's it?
But the fund will hire people who are within that. I mean, if you have
at fault, I understand the sentiment, but like, who's at fault? The fund doesn't believe there are enough deals in one sector, so they keep themselves generalists.
So this is where I think it's the egg and the chicken. Where I was just talking the other day with an investor, and he's like, "Oh no, we're agnostic," and I'm like, "You're hurting the industry because now you're sending mixed signals." If let's say I'm an entrepreneur, and I understand the game, and I've studied it in MBAs, I've actually started a couple of startups, and I failed, and now I'm well versed in it. a fund, like you said, like in much mature markets that are extremely specific. Now I know that, okay, I'm building something because in 6 months, 8 months time, I need to target these 10 funds because it gives me the pulling factor and the magnetic kind of to allow me to focus. But if it's everything is agnostic.
But I'm just maybe I'm taking
This is basic.
to your word. It's not hurting. It's cause and effect. I mean, what's driving the other? And go back to the whole story about Danny.
Yeah.
Danny needs to raise a fund. He needs to raise fund from LPs. He needs to sell that story to the LPs. If there is not enough appetite, deal flow, return of investment in a particular sector, how does he go out and raise funds? He can tell the story, and I'm talking about Danny's done phenomenally well, and they've just raised their funds. I'm giving the example of him on stage.
He's then
saying he has an LP that he needs to justify his investments to. So is it hurting the industry, or is it as a result of the maturity of the industry?
So let me bring it home for you. And this is again my thinking, and I love this because it's how we understand and how we kind of propagate that understanding. It's like you have a parent who's mature, and I look at LPs, VCs, and capital market, generally speaking, as the mature players in the kind of growth, economic growth, generally speaking. And then you have the founders who are, adolescents, kids, sort of trying to understand where do they need to do, dabbling with and testing the water wherever they go, right? If these people, and I can guarantee you, if now a fund for, let's say, edutech announced and kind of shouted from rooftops that we're now setting up a fund for 50 million, we are ready to receive applications for edutech will start popping up left, right, and center, and they will have people coming to them. So it is a cause and effect. I get you. And it is the egg and the chicken, but who's more mature with more resources that is able to kind of move the needle?
You see, I think you set up an edutech where you believe there's enough edutechs to invest in. You don't set up an edutech to create companies that invest in
that's the capitalist market. Yeah, I get you. So let me just be very clear. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying if our, let's say, intentions is to actual economic growth, and by extension, of course, I will get rich out of it, as opposed to the opposite.
So the one point that you're making that I do believe that there is value in exploring is what you do see in more mature markets is where government investment, patient capital. Let's talk about patient capital.
Yeah.
But patient capital is not venture capital.
Yes.
Right? So venture capital,
Can you define it?
I want to make it clear that venture capital in its purest form is an LPGP. You have an LP, you have a 5 to 7 year window. It has to be deployed, and then it has to have a return on investment that beats the market. I mean, that's your LPGP structure.
When you say beat the market, as in the public market?
Whichever markets, public markets, real estate, any asset class.
So if it's 7% in the public, then this has to be, let's say, 15%.
Put it like this. Why do we see venture capital investments slow down in the last couple of years? And it was on a podcast, All In. Yeah. If interest rates are at 5%, you can get corporate bonds for 7%.
Yeah.
The stock market is up this year 15, 20%. I think it's the first time that in 4 years you have not had a down year, and each year has had an average of about 10 to 20% growth in the S&P or NASDAQ. So just investing in the stock market is giving you that return.
Without risk?
With risk, but less risk than a company failing.
I mean, in the case of bonds and others,
cash, etc. So that opportunity cost has created a crowding out effect of investment, whereby your minimum expectation is that every investment you're making as a fund is returning greater, for the sake of argument, than 30%. And we know that portfolio theory, 22 of them are going to be stand out, 7 of them are going to fail, a couple of them in the middle. Minimum is returning 30+% annual growth to justify putting your money in that asset class versus anything else.
Yes.
Herein lies the challenge with regards to why VC can't set up the EduTech fund to create the startups. The startups have to be there to invest in, to see the return in 7 years.
I get that.
Patient capital, as a definition, I don't know the definition, but in so much as it does not have a mandate. It is people who have beliefs in a segment. It can come from research. It can come from government. It can be grant, which I'm not a huge fan of, but if it's related to research and university, it can be angel investors that don't have an LP mandate, but have a belief in a particular segment.
Like sustainability, for example.
Education.
There's
people, either angel investors, government, corporates can have longer horizons than a pure LPGP venture model. And they can be more patient to seed. I was speaking to a client recently. They were asking us to benchmark investments in segments versus US data to be able to see where there is a gap in the investment opportunities so that they could potentially be the seeders of that sector versus others like fintech and AI, and which they have longer term horizons than your LPGP structure. And I think that's the point that I'm trying to say. I can understand that argument, but it is not a general argument because the purest investor is looking for the return.
It's purpose-based, it's kind of values anchored, it's kind of principled investors rather than pure capital. My $1, I want it to be $3 in whatever, right? So I think to your point, when you look at it from a purely quantitative perspective, as in spreadsheets and projections and DCF and, God forbids you just try to kind of forecast. But then if you add to it the qualitative elements, so for example, if I'm from Jordan, right? If I'm an investor, I would look at the prosperity of Jordan as a market. Because the economy, what's the measure of a successful economy? It's the welfare and the lifestyle of the people of the economy. That's it. I mean, you can talk about all the quantitative sort of measures, but that's it. So if I'm a principled investor and I have deep understanding of how markets work, how problem solving works, and then I'm able to move the needle in a way that is substantive and meaningful, and again, it's 5% of my portfolio because I'm diversified and I have all of those other asset classes that's still generating me kind of returns. Why wouldn't I do that? But to your point, that's more idealistic. That's more kind of...
But it's also more governmental. Like that's why governments end up being some of the biggest funders in certain geographies, whether it's through what are the sovereign wealth funds the mandates are to invest in their geographies. They have a financial return, but they also have an economic return, an impact return. But your private investor or your LPGP VC investor have...
Well, I'll tell you my thought on this. And I love what you said about governments, because yes, governments has to be at the forefront of this for two reasons. A, it will signal confidence and precedence that will give the normal kind of LP, or let's say investor or high net worth individual or ultra high net worth individuals saying, you know what, if the government's having a skin in the game and that skin in the game is probably 20%, I'll put 5% of that and then I'll participate in that. And I'll put my principles at the test. And I agree. That I think is the only way to actually make a difference when it comes to other than just looking at it quantitatively, right? So if we talk about the funnel again, so we have people dropping out, you said, at 93%. Is it lack of that capital, or is it incompetency of the...
No, it's a very difficult business. I mean, tech in general is very difficult. To meet those benchmarks of 30% return on an annualized basis is very difficult. You need to... you go back to the first question you told me. What's entrepreneurship? You're starting a company from scratch in an area that you are trying to create an efficiency where inefficiency exists. You have to find a problem that people can identify with. You need people to spend money on this problem. You need to scale that problem to get to exponential returns. You need the team members. It is a people business. Lest we not forget, money will give you money, but in the end, you need the team, the culture. It is very difficult. I mean, like entrepreneurship in general, I think this is what sometimes people just forget. It is very difficult. If you are not ready to commit, as I say, in all of the forums and podcasts, 150% of your life for 10 years to potentially be successful.
I love that.
They just don't start it in the first place. That's the problem. It's all good doing it for 2-3 years. And okay, you want to do it for the experience. But if you want to be that 1%, it's a level of narcissistic like drive to get you there, which is why all of these characters are very interesting characters. When there's a reason they are what they are, is that they're driven by kind of just very strong beliefs. So it's not incompetence. It's never incompetence. Like you don't go into entrepreneurship and claim that it's incompetent. It's extremely difficult. And therefore there are so many elements that you have to get right. Funding is a problem, but good companies attract funding. I think one thing I've learned over the years is that capital is available. Yeah. There are times where it is more scarce and it's more ubiquitous than others, but you still need, I always say that fundraising is an exercise where you try to eliminate the no's. People don't say yes. Yeah. It's like playing, I remember those old Cluedo games where if you flip the chart, all of the heads came up, and to try and find out who the person was, you start putting the heads down, and right at the end, you have the final person. Your job is to try and bring down all of the no's to get to the yes. And so there are so many no's that people and investors, as you know, go and speak to your investor friends. They're getting pitched at dinner and every morning on their jog, on their. So,
I really feel sorry for them, honestly. Honestly,
I don't know that I feel sorry for them. It's their job, but
well, yes. I'll tell you what. It's like they say always. It's lonely at the top. I really feel sorry for CEOs, for example, of large organizations, because it's genuinely difficult and tough. I'm a coach of many of them, and the way they just describe their.
Are you saying you feel sorry for the CEOs? I thought you were saying in the investors.
I'll tell you what. So the investors, okay, so it's a different thing. But the investors is, I feel sorry because, let one investor who's actually a well-known investor, talk about, I don't know, Fadi Ghandour, right? So one of our friends. I bet you if he opens his LinkedIn, he'll always have probably a couple of thousand messages every day.
Yes. No. And that's to my point. And it goes, you go into a conversation, you've already inbuilt, I've heard the story. And I'm not an investor, so I can't speak on behalf of the psyche of the mindset, but just from a pure numbers game, you are likely to have already heard and know that, have you got the following? Hence, I'm saying it's not about the yes, it's about eliminating the no's to get to a yes. And so when you're talking about raising funds, you have to have your story. You have to have your numbers. You have to have your dream. You have to have your aspiration. You have to have an actual product. You have to have the clients.
Isn't that a talent?
That's what entrepreneurship is. But entrepreneurship is also, there's one person and get the team around you to solve the other problems.
Yeah.
It's being able to attract those people to help you solve that problem.
Right.
And hence, it is difficult.
I'll tell you what, it's absolutely no questions asked. It's one of the most difficult things. And I always compare it, especially with my clients, to Olympics. Just because you hit the gym every morning from 6 to 7 and you're able to bench press whatever, 100 kilos,
does
not qualify you to actually remotely be near the Olympics, and anywhere near. So it's exactly the same thing. So I always tell them it's a much more complicated thing, but I always lean back to competency because there's an element of laziness, of people not wanting to learn, to actually upskill themselves, to actually understand the language of the financial sector. Because let's be real here. VC is a financial sector, right? So you have to understand the numbers. And I heard it from, a dear friend, probably you know him, Jonathan Lahiani, Michael's. He always says, Osama, I wish every founder, there's a mandate that every founder must have a CFA. And I looked at them, I was like, you're right. Because every time I speak to a founder, well, again, it's an extreme case, I understand. But the point is, financial literacy and the ability to understand how to speak to VCs. And this is my argument. It's not a kind of truth, but this is why 60 to 70%, the latest report that I think I read it from MAGNiTT, 60-70% of the capital raised year to date, is from fintech.
Yeah.
Isn't that? Yeah. So, in my opinion, I don't know, I've never read it somewhere, but in my opinion, it's qualitatively, because if I'm fintech, vis-a-vis I'm from the financial sector, you're an investor, whether you're a VC, angel, whatever, not angel, probably VC institutional, you're also from the financial sector, we speak the same language. But if I'm from edutech, from biotech, from medtech, from agriculture tech, I probably never touched a spreadsheet in my life, right? So when I speak with you, you will tell me, oh, your valuation is what? How much is your revenue? I made 1,000. Okay, your valuation is 2,000, 2x. Oh, really? Okay, fine, let's go. And then obviously that will not turn well and people will be frustrated. What do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, look, on the point of the CFA, you can hire someone with a CFA. The founder doesn't need to have the CFA.
Yeah, granted.
I mean, I was on a talk recently, which was a roundtable discussion, and you had 4 companies that were all looking to IPO, and their CFOs were on there. These guys were at Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. So at a certain stage, the founder acknowledges, even with a CFA.
I'm talking about, let's say, at the early stage.
At the early stage, I
at least financial literacy.
I think that storytelling is more important.
Really?
Yeah, at the very early stage.
Do you think storytelling can inflate the valuation more than it is actually when it's grounded in numbers?
Of course.
So do you think that part of this, and that was my next question, do you think part of the failures that happens early on is that inflated valuation, which is wrong because now you have to live up to that valuation for the next round?
There's 2 parts of that. Right. I think that in my opinion, humble opinion, is that at the very early stage, it doesn't matter what your numbers are, in so much as you are selling a dream. Investors invest in you because they believe in you as a founder, right? I've pivoted 7 times in 10 years. If the first idea was the idea that I was now, it's very rare that people stick. So you have to sell the concept of a dream that people buy into, substantiated with numbers. But I don't think that the numbers are the thing that you're going to invest in. You can argue that at Series A, it becomes more important. And I'm making the argument at Series C, you got a professional guy that's only job is to do that. So there's an evolution at each step of that journey.
Agreed. Yeah.
But I do believe that the storytelling concept is something. Why, when we did our research, do you find that 30 to 40% of founders here had come from either investment banking or consulting, where your only job is to do pitch decks, right?
And spreadsheets
and pitch decks, right? But it's the pitch decks. It's not the spreadsheet.
It's the story, yeah. But the story is predicated, or it's hinged, or kind of, like. So
on the valuation side, yes, but this is a different problem.
But forward-looking valuation, and dare I say, I know I always get in trouble for this, DCF, right? So trying to apply forward, let's say DCF with discounted at WACC, let's say 14, 15%, and kind of future value of money today. So all of that, if you're able to kind of first do it, because if you know your TAM, if you know target addressable market, and you know how much you're going to attract from that, and then all of a sudden you don't understand that, oh, my whole market, my whole TAM is 50 million. I mean, but you have to know that. It's not a story that will get you there. And if you're telling a story that actually inflates that, and your investors, like you said, you're more expert in your market and in your niche and in your sector more than your investors. But if your investors, and dare I say, naive enough to actually believe in those stories.
Well, but that's that's a whole different game. Nobody's forcing the investor to give you money.
It's not about,
and the investor has a responsibility, especially if they have an LP, to do their due diligence.
But do they?
That's up to each one. I mean, I'm sure that many of them do. They have to as part of their...
This is where I'm saying, if we're doing our... let's say, because it's all about, like, let's say in companies, one of the biggest success kind of criteria of companies is the hiring and firing.
Yeah.
So if your entry point is actually at a point where you're not actually allowing someone who's not ready, even if he does really well at the interview, is dressed well, he comes, with the suited and tie and the handkerchief and everything, and talks well, being able to put thoughts into words in the most kind of charismatic way, but then you put him on the job, but he's not able to do anything. You know what I mean? So that's where...
then hire slow and fire fast.
That's what I'm trying to say. So the same thing with valuations and the understanding of the groundedness of the stories at the beginning, probably. And this is what I see day in, day out. And obviously, I'm not an expert here. I'm still early in the game, only 3 years. You've been here for much, much longer. And I'm speaking to investment bankers who've been decades doing this thing at a much larger scale. But I keep on hearing the same story. It's about the gut feeling. It's about this. It's about that, which is instrumentally important. I mean, don't get me wrong there. I'm not discounting that. I'm just saying it's basic, it's lazy, and it's simple. It's very uncomfortable for people to say that out loud. And I know I've been in hot water. I've been called out for this, and I will always keep calling it out because first principle thinking says.
As a concept, I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I think it depends on the stage. Your DCF model and the WACC and the calculation at a Series B, Series C or D, where you're
Makes
raising
sense, yeah.
200, 300, 400 million dollars. Yeah, you need all the investment bankers in the world to be able to model that, because the investor is expecting a return in 2 years. They're not expecting a return in 8 years. They're looking for an IPO. It's one of the challenges that we're facing now. Why you're not seeing late stage funding is because they're not sure that they're going to IPO. There's not much more capital you can raise, right? So your DCF model is extremely important. For a $1 million seed round, as I already kind of highlighted, that company, that 50 million TAM that you're talking about, if you give them $1 million and they flip it into an AI company, can become 500 million. So you're not investing on the 50 million. You're investing in the belief that this could become
The pivot.
a $1 billion company. And every time the company grows, that becomes less likely or more challenging because you're already rooted
Because
into
you're a
an
mammoth,
and hence the gut is it's like correlated. Gut feeling at early stage is much higher, or it still exists when you come and meet a property finder. You still want to get with the founder, but at that point there's a founding team and there's a management structure.
Founder,
It's a much more than one thing that we don't talk about a lot here in the region is that when you go to the history of the Silicon Valleys, at a Series B and C, because of the crazy valuations and the investor power, they usually get fired. Like founders that started companies are not the companies that take them to late stage. They get moved on.
Right.
There are many historical
You mean the boards
examples
fire the founders
at a certain stage
That's okay.
because the skill set required. Steve Jobs, many examples in the US.
Of course. Yeah.
Cisco, there's many examples in the US of companies that started off with founders that as they got to a Series C and D were not the right people for that stage of company. Whereas here, we don't get that change of leadership. Here it's consistently many
Why
of the
is
founders.
that?
Again, I think it's just the evolution of the market, the
Maturity of understanding of how
That's
to
a
run things.
ruthless mindset in the US. And we're talking ticket sizes that are ginormous when you're getting to Series C and D with cutthroat historical expectations whereby there's also legal precedent. Why is it that many people don't like, we're going into the comfortable, that why is it that many VCs are uncomfortable investing to a certain extent here in the region is because at the operating level, the company structures are sometimes in free zones or jurisdictions where you do not have the right to get rid of the founding members or because the managing directors. Well, I mean, purely from a structure perspective, who's the managing director of the company?
But I mean, the sentiment is there. Have you heard it before?
It's not the sentiment. It can purely be the legal structure because the holding companies are BVI, Cayman Island, Delaware. You invest because of the British common law structures of those jurisdictions, who are the holding companies of the operating companies locally. But the local regulation, it's the parent company who is the investor into the local company, but the local company is not the shareholders, and the managing director is most likely to be the CEO of the company.
And that scares investors. Because the regulation does not give them the power and authority to handle things. I
have been told that, yes.
That's crazy.
So sometimes it's that structuring that needs to provide confidence to the international
Do we
investor.
want that? Do we want that, in your opinion?
I mean, again, I'm not an investor to be able to say whether I want that or don't want that. But I do think that when you look at the free zone structures here, they were never created or designed for that type of structure.
And hence most investors ask startups to move to DIFC or ADGM because they use the
which
common
are
law.
now becoming
common law and
dominant startup jurisdictions.
And they feel more comfortable. So they want them to invest there because they are able to kind of apply those
Some free
things.
zones, for instance, don't allow for more than X number of shareholders. But when you're getting to a multi-stage company,
your cap table is ginormous.
So you've got angel investors, you've got employees, and hence it doesn't make sense. So they create the BVI, the Cayman Island, the DIFC, the ADGM, the different structures. So these are, we talk about maturity. We talk about evolution of the market. We're talking about these are parcel of the evolution.
But again, this is I don't want to dwell on that. We have to end this topic. But this is the later stage problem, not the early stage problem.
Yeah.
It's not the kind of because I don't want to say bottleneck, but again, the leakage of the pipeline is happening between seed and Series A.
Look, I mean, the equivalent number in the US is about 18% that graduate from seed to Series A. So we are half the average of what the companies are in the US, right? So it's not great. We looked at...
See, give me credit for not asking.
So yeah, well, no, that's okay. And the Southeast Asian equivalent was about 12%. So
we're still
about
way
4 percentage points. Way behind is 4 percentage points. But we're not talking about 50. It's not like we're saying that 50% of seed companies go to Series A. So in general, there is a high level of leakage or churn that happens at that stage, right? Can that 1 percentage point improvement on 2,000 deals is not a small number of companies, right? But they're incremental growth.
And the potential of having, the kind of large exits or even unicorns is infinitely multiplied because of that, right?
Correct. That's why I was recently with government and we were looking at the funnel and we identified that. So there's a lot of obsession about the problems. That's why I was saying, is the biggest problem at late stage? No. You want to have continual pipeline for the next generation.
You need to apply the laws of averages, right? The more volumes you have, the more chances of you ending up with those. So, I mean, what do you think of the metric of this system, of this pipeline that people keep talking about? And I don't know if it's real metric or just pop culture metric. Unicorns.
Yeah. No, I mean...
I don't like that. What do you think about it?
Again, you remember the story, aim for the stars and you land on the trees, aim on the trees and you land on the floor. Unicorns has become an obsession in the tech world because it's a quantified number of companies that are valued over $1 billion.
There's other quantified numbers, which is follow-on cashes at each stage.
Sure.
Because if you're able to kind of... Because you can quantify the follow-on cash per...
Remember that unicorns are also horses with horns and it's an altruistically so it's aspirationally amazing. How many unicorns are actual unicorns here? There aren't many that have actually been acquired at a unicorn valuation. There are companies that are valued at unicorn valuations because of investment rounds that they've achieved, but there are very few and far between that have been acquired at a unicorn valuation. So even then they're extremely thin, but it's the light at the end of the tunnel. It's what people like to fantasize about. I believe that we need more. We've looked at the data. There's less than 45 exits that have taken place, M&A transactions this year. We talked about that at the talk.
That's important.
There's been less than 30 last year, less than 20, right? Less than 7% of all companies that have received an investment in the region have seen an M&A transaction. And I can't even tell you that the quality of those M&A transactions have been great. We know that some of them have been amazing. Many of them are acqui-hires or small. We need more M&A transactions, or the market would like to see more return of investments from M&A transactions before obsessing about the unicorns.
Yes.
But the unicorns are, there's levels to aspirations, and that's one of them.
I come from a sort of an economic contribution and growth perspective, right? And if you look at unicorns, obviously it's nothing. Like you said, it's just mirage. But if you look at follow-on cash, if you look at the kind of deal value, the quantity of the deals and the total deal value, the follow-on cash, the kind of how much money are put in at later stages, that means two things. First, due diligence has happened, meaning the operations are actually meaningfully contributing to whatever sector these companies are operating in, meaning they're creating jobs, they're creating value, they're creating everything that kind of contributes to the growth of the economy. Unicorns is nothing.
GDP contribution is one of the best metrics to be able to kind of, the contribution of VC invested tech companies. Now, the problem is that's a challenge that we also try to solve, trying to get accurate revenue. Take a Kareem. What is the contribution in the UAE? There will be the regulators that may know that contribution, but at a holding company level, it's going to be cross-jurisdictional, Saudi, UAE, Pakistan, Egypt, etc. So it's very difficult to get an accurate number of the contribution for a economy of that operating company. And that's one of the things that we try to work with. We know the companies that have received investment. They know the revenue of the companies, especially now that we're incorporating corporate tax in the economy. So you start getting this level of, it's about
The books becomes cleaner.
It's about matching them.
Right.
And who is the entity that wants to do that matching? But the other problem.
But the easiest way is kind of how much money is injected, because that money is injected, like you said, by investors.
But that doesn't really, you can get money, but it doesn't mean that you're a good company. It doesn't mean that there are loss-making companies that scale without generating revenue, clients,
But there have to be something, unit economic, that actually entices that investor, whether it's, I don't know, number of subscriptions like you started the talk with, like whatever it is, that it doesn't have to always be revenue. I mean, revenue is always good. But even if it's revenue at a negative EBITDA, or even if it's a unit economics that is different initially, that potentially could turn, like our friend Sam Altman and OpenAI. I mean, he's claiming that he's spending 1.4 trillion at a 20 billion revenue. I mean, talk about discrepancy. But the point here is, it talks about something that is quantifiable and measurable. You can measure it. You can see that, okay, we spent, this is how much follow-on cash here, this is how much follow-on cash here, this is how much follow-on cash here. And the deal value in total is that, and it's carry forward. There's not like lots of deal value here and then it's kind of diminishing.
I don't disagree, but I don't think it's the best metric to quantify an industry. You can put money into something, it doesn't mean that it's a good contributor to the economy.
Granted. What does MAGNiTT mean?
As a name?
In its form, because there's the small I and the...
So it was originally, because we were the connection platform.
Right.
I was very dear to the fact that I needed a name that kind of represented bringing the entities together. And I was very dear to the fact that it needed to be 2-syllable. Tinder, all of those names at the time, Uber, you're going back to a time, Twitter, they were all 2-syllable nomenclatures that were easy to use. And so I had a friend of mine that was in advertising, and kind of we just brainstormed. And that was one of those learning lessons where there were Invest Cap, Invest Table, Invest Connect. It was so many different names that we kind of came up with. And then one of them was thrown just MAGNiTT. And it hit me. And it's one of those things that where you are. And then he goes, and the other thing that I was very dear, had to have .com. I needed to have a .com. And so MAGNiTT.com is a big company in Russia, actually, that does white goods. And so they started just playing around with the concept of what could it be? MAGNITT, MIGNITT, MET. And so what was available as a .com for $100 at the time was MAGNITT. And I remember his advice was like, look, this can change in 10 years, but grab it as part of your storytelling. If it resonates with you, you can sell it. If you don't like the name, it'll be very difficult to sell it in terms of to people. And so he was like, cool, let me just come up with a design. Now it's magnet connection. So M is the 2 magnets.
I love it. Yeah. It's very unique.
You say you love it. At the time, people were like, you're crazy. This is stupid. Like
really?
People didn't like it because they didn't know what we were doing. So like, but that's silly.
So it's the same brand since 10 years?
Yeah, it's never changed. The same logo, same brand,
same color. You know what?
Color.
That's smart. Because I know what, I'll recognize it from, I told you, I ingested your reports like crazy, right? So obviously in my field and before that in the events industry, we always, especially Future Stars at the time where we launched it. And so the idea is it's catchy.
And people talked about it.
Yeah.
You like to be talked about than not talked about. So people would always say, oh, but why is the I small? I was like, for me, it didn't matter. As long as people are talking about it, great. And it's stuck since. And now it's become somewhat of a kind of
a household name. No, it is a household name.
That people know and they recognize that the I is small and the 2 T's.
Exactly.
And et cetera. So it's kind of just stuck as part of the identity and the color. It's one of the things that we had a whole discussion with our marketing team is like, yeah, but MAGNiTT's really red. It's negative because it's like, obviously numbers are down red. I said, doesn't matter. Look at every one of our competitors and they tend to all be blue. And we're the only ones that are this crimson-y red color that sticks out. So I was like, great. So then we stick out. I mean, now we're broadly white backgrounds but it's black, red. And it stands out relative to many of the other kind of brands. So it's stuck as part of the identity of what we've been creating.
And it's a great identity, I tell you. I mean, I couldn't speak with anyone who doesn't recognize or work with reports or reference data that it's not coming from MAGNiTT. So that's 100% hands down. It is something that you've created and I really applaud you for it. Where do you see it in 5 years?
Our goal is to become the leading private capital data platform for emerging markets. So I mentioned to you already, there's 3 elements that we look at. 1, geography. Do we want to expand into other markets? The challenge is I don't know where we would look to go. We have demand from Japan, China, Southeast Europe, but I think we're relatively set geographically because we have those benchmarked economies. The second is in the data set. We already cover venture capital comprehensively. We cover private equity, which we launched earlier this year. We cover venture debt. There is a huge demand in the market, well, huge, a quantifiable demand in the market for private credit, which has become extremely popular, both at a government level and down at a private institutional level. So I think that within the next 12 months, we'll have private credit transactions on the MAGNiTT platform. And then we're exploring whether it makes sense in 5 years to have infrastructure and real estate, given the activity that's happening in both of those here in the region. And then the third pillar is kind of the product proposition. And for us, it's really how do we define the use of AI technology, charting, visualization, information, research, and intelligence around the core data set that we continue to build. But for us, it wants to become the #1 market leader for all things private capital. So if we were to have a conversation about real estate or infrastructure, credit, all of those conversations would form part of the 20% of the investment portfolio that people have a lack of data on.
What's your, it's all of your data is primary? So you do collect your own data, or how do?
It's primary, it's aggregated, it's proprietary, working with different organizations to make sure we have information that is proprietary to us.
Yeah.
We do primary research where we reach out to investors and startups. Take a step back. We're in a part of the world where there are no regulatory bodies, as we've already discussed, to pull this information from. And in the
you don't have a
absence of
statistics, let's say, authority there.
And even if you did, for the UAE or Dubai, you're not having it for Saudi and the GCC. And so across all of these, you're having to cover a regional problem, not just a specific local. So we can pull from a regulator that decides to do this information, but it'll be one piece of a much wider jigsaw puzzle. And so as a result of that, you need to get the information directly from the entities. And so that's either great, all the press releases, thank you very much. But we challenge those press releases, exactly what we said. If something doesn't make sense, and we've had many difficult conversations where we said, we will not report this number. That creates frictions at all different types of levels.
How do you manage that? Because you need PR as well.
That's a whole podcast in itself. But we are very dear to this. And if we do not have a reference that is either a public reference, an email reference, or a confirmation from an investor or a founder, we will consider the round as undisclosed and use our proxies for the investment round based on the industry averages. If we have it confirmed, we'll include it as a confirmed investment based on a public source and or a confirmation from an investor. And this is where our verified data is more comprehensive than international or other benchmarking platforms, which is why sometimes our numbers are more conservative than what you see publicly from international, because they'll just put everything together and include it. So yes, there's a primary element, but there's an aggregate level data
and
perspective and proprietary.
If you have a magic wand, and you just do one thing that will just unlock everything for MAGNiTT, what would that be?
I don't have a specific magic wand request, but if we want to do more accurate research and intelligence, we need more granular data than what we have. Take, for example, secondaries. We're only now realizing when you calculate the DPI funds of investors. So there's a big demand in the market from a government, a regulator, international investors, and other players to understand how have funds performed. We talked about that 10-year return of investment. How has BICO performed? How has Y investment fund performed? And they'll put out some content, which again comes from them, and they'll give their methodology, but there is no benchmarking methodology across the funds. And the challenge is that sometimes you don't know their contribution and investment. You don't have the exit multiple, and they do secondary investments as a point in case, which is not captured because people don't like to disclose secondary information. In the absence of all of that, you get superficial, higher level data and information.
Yeah.
If we're able to capture
Like we
this level of
discussed,
information, which we're beginning to try and tackle, but again, this thing takes time.
Yeah.
And I promise you that any international platform will apply proxies to what they've seen to similar type of structures, as opposed to having the underlying data.
Really?
Because they don't, if we're not unable to get
Like comparables, you mean?
Exactly, comparables for other. If we're unable to do it, it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to do it without literally getting the fund information.
Right, of course.
And so for me, it's not really a want, but it's a wish that there was more willingness to share this, because better educated governments, better educated LPs, better educated ecosystems will lead to more investment capital into the region. The more opaque we stay and the lack of information and data that we have around it, the less likely we're going to see this growth and development in the venture ecosystem. Obviously, MAGNiTT benefits from this. I'm not going to lie.
Of course.
But we can help facilitate
benefit,
the mark
everybody
from
benefits.
it. Everyone
Yes,
benefits.
absolutely. I mean, that's without saying. Where does academia sit in the whole kind of, because it's all about research, it's about data, it's about kind of understanding of different nuances that usually academia should have. I mean, in mature markets, you always have industry academia relationships, especially when it comes to research, data, reports.
Look, I mean, there's a role for academia. Claudia Zeisberger, who's a professor at INSEAD, who I've now built a strong relationship with, is one of the foremost experts in emerging market private capital. But it's a matter of incentives. What is the incentive of the academia to build these content pieces and etc.? So the private institution have an incentive because we want to monetize it. Academia, brand, want to create transparency.
And publish.
Government. So we see in Saudi, for instance, Claudia is working with Jeddah, the fund of funds, which is invested by PIF, to create this transparency because they understand the importance of this. So academia is a facilitator, it's conduit to this, but someone needs to be paying the academic. So it's a matter of,
that's true.
That's where I mean incentives. Who's paying the academic to create the transparency?
And that's a problem in our region because we don't have enough grants. I mean, the other day I was speaking to the president of one of the massive universities here in the region, and I looked at their P&L, and 91% of their top line is coming only from tuition. Compared that to Yale, only 8%.
Yeah.
And the rest is grants, endowment, government, exactly. Right. So they're able to kind of play with the money because, and obviously funnel to research that allows them to then partner with MAGNiTT and other companies that does research to do published research and peer-reviewed kind of publications. But you're right, this region has a fundamental issue with industry academia because of that. Okay, so I'll tell you what, I can sit for 3 more hours talking with you because it's absolutely different. I'll tell you what, different when you talk to someone who's grounded with data, who kind of understands the kind of nuances of the data, but also of the qualitative market, and specifically when it's niche to VC. Philip, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the discussion, the academic and then the altruistic discussion. So thank you very much for having me.